When one of the most famous men on the planet knocked on the door of a small white house on Sycamore Lane in Abbeville, Alabama, the old man inside had no idea who was coming. He never did on any morning. But every morning for 34 years, Earl Pickett had walked to his front door at 8 a.m., opened it, and looked out at the road. Just looked. Then he went back inside and made his coffee. It was a Tuesday morning, April 11th, 2023. The air smelled like cut grass and something sweet from a neighbor's garden. Birds moved through the oak trees that lined the street. The road was quiet. Abbeville, Alabama is a small town. Population just over 2,500. The kind of town where everybody knows which car belongs to which family, and the post office closes early on Fridays. Shaquille O'Neal, 7 feet 1 inch tall, 325 pounds, walked up the 3 porch steps of that small white house and knocked twice. His hand was so large that 2 knocks sounded like 4. He stood back and waited. Inside, Earl Pickett, 81 years old, heard the knock. He set his coffee mug on the kitchen counter. He walked slowly to the front door, one hand trailing the wall for balance, the way he had done since his hip replacement 2 years ago. He opened the door. He looked up. A long way up. He said nothing for 5 full seconds. Then he said, "Well, I'll be." Earl Pickett had not been expecting anyone. He never had visitors on Tuesday mornings. His daughter Constance came on Sundays. His neighbor Warren came by sometimes on Thursdays to return tools he had borrowed and never quite got around to bringing back. But Tuesday mornings were Earl's quiet time. His alone time. The time he spent on the porch with his coffee, looking at the road. He had been looking at that road for 34 years. Not because he was waiting for something specific, but the people who knew Earl would have told you the truth. Earl Pickett had been waiting since 1989 to know if something he did had mattered. To understand why Shaquille O'Neal drove to Abbeville, Alabama on a Tuesday morning in April, you have to go back. Past the championships, past the Hall of Fame, past the businesses and the television shows and the doctorate degree from Barry University in Florida. Past all of it. You have to go back to the summer of 1989. To a public basketball court on the edge of Fort Rucker Military Base near Daleville, Alabama, and a 17-year-old boy who was already 6 feet 9 inches tall and angrier than he had any words for. Shaquille Rashawn O'Neal was born on March 6, 1972, in Newark, New Jersey. His mother, Lucille O'Neal, had raised him mostly on her own in the Central Ward, one of the toughest neighborhoods in America. His stepfather, Sergeant Philip Harrison of the United States Army, was a steady and principled man who moved the family from base to base as his assignments changed. Germany, New Jersey, Georgia, Texas, Alabama. By the summer of 1989, Shaq was 17 and the family was stationed near Daleville, Alabama. He had just finished his sophomore year at a school where he knew nobody and nobody knew him. He was already enormous and still growing. He was quiet in the way that very large people sometimes are, because the world had taught him early that when you take up as much space as he did, quieter was safer. But the quiet was thin that summer. His stepfather was stern and the rules at home were strict, and Shaq was 17 and did not always understand the difference between discipline and distance. There were arguments, silences that lasted days, a feeling inside the apartment that the walls were too close. Shaq went to the basketball court on the edge of the base to get away from it. Every morning, sometimes twice a day, he would shoot for hours, alone mostly, working through something he could not name by doing the only thing that made the size of his body feel like an advantage instead of a problem. One morning in July, an old man showed up at the court. He was not military. He was 58 years old, wearing khaki pants and a short-sleeved plaid shirt and white sneakers with Velcro straps. He carried a folding chair under one arm and a thermos in the other hand. He set the chair up on the sideline, poured himself something from the thermos, and watched. Shaq ignored him at first. Then, after about 20 minutes, the old man spoke. "You shoot with your elbow out," he said. "That's why your free throws go left." Shaq stopped. He turned around. He looked at the old man in the folding chair. "Excuse me?" Shaq said. "Your elbow," the man said again, completely unbothered. It wings out when you release. Pulls the ball left every time. You want to fix it or you want to keep missing? Shaq stared at him for a long moment. Then he turned back to the basket. He shot. The ball went left of center. He turned back around. "Show me," he said. The old man's name was Earl Pickett. He had grown up in Abbeville. He had played basketball at a small college in Montgomery for 2 years before a knee injury ended it. He had spent 30 years working at a hardware store and coaching youth basketball at his church on Wednesday evenings. He had no credentials, no title, no official reason to be on that court. He had simply driven over from Abbeville that morning because his wife had told him he needed to get out of the house, and he had ended up at the court on the edge of the base the way people end up places sometimes without planning it, drawn by something quieter than intention. Earl stood up from his folding chair. He walked onto the court. He was 5 feet 10 inches tall. He came up to Shaq's chest. He showed him the elbow, how to keep it tucked, how to let the wrist do the work at the end. Shaq tried it. The ball went straight. He tried it again. Straight again. Earl went back to his chair. He poured more from his thermos. He watched. They did not talk much after that. Shaq shot. Earl watched. Occasionally, Earl said something about footwork, about positioning, about the way Shaq dropped his shoulder before a move, telegraphing it to any defender paying attention. Small things. Precise things. The kind of things that only someone who had watched basketball for decades would notice. This went on for 11 mornings. 11 mornings in July 1989, the old man from Abbeville drove to the court on the edge of Fort Rucker and sat in his folding chair and watched and occasionally said something worth hearing. On the 12th morning, Shaq arrived at the court and the folding chair was not there. Earl Pickett was not there. He was not there the next morning either, or the one after that. Shaq never saw him again. He did not know the man's last name. He did not know where he lived. He had never asked. He had been 17, and the mornings had been what they were, and then they were over. The way things end when you are young, without ceremony, without goodbye. But he had kept the elbow tucked for 34 years. Every free throw, every practice, every game, the tucked elbow had become part of him so completely that he could no longer separate it from everything else he knew about the game. But he knew where it came from. He had always known. In the winter of 2022, Shaq was doing a long interview for a documentary about his career. The interviewer asked him about his development as a player, about the coaches and teachers who had shaped him. Shaq talked about his stepfather, Philip. He talked about his coaches at LSU. He talked about a few others. Then he stopped. He said, "There was an old man." The summer of 1989, near Daleville, Alabama. He came to the court 11 mornings and never told me his name. He fixed my free throw. I never said thank you. The documentary team, out of curiosity, spent 3 weeks making calls. They reached out to church leagues in the Daleville area. They contacted the Abbeville city office. They talked to coaches who had been active in that region in the late 1980s. They found Earl Pickett, still living in Abbeville, still in the same house on Sycamore Lane, 81 years old. Hip replacement 2 years prior. His wife, Margaret, had passed in 2018 after 51 years of marriage. His daughter, Constance, visited on Sundays. He spent his mornings on the porch looking at the road. When the documentary researcher called Constance to ask about her father, Constance said something that stopped the conversation completely. She said, "My father has talked about that summer for 30 years. He always wondered about the tall boy on the court. He never knew what happened to him." Shaq did not send a letter. He did not call ahead. He did not ask his team to arrange anything. He drove himself from the airport in a rental car on a Tuesday morning in April. He parked on Sycamore Lane 2 houses down. He walked up the 3 porch steps and knocked twice. Now Earl Pickett stood in his doorway in a white undershirt and gray pants and slippers, looking up at the largest human being he had ever seen standing on his porch. "You still have the thermos?" Shaq asked. Earl Pickett's face did something then that his daughter Constance, who heard the story 3 days later, said she had never seen it do before. It went completely still, like a man who has been waiting for a word in a language he almost forgot and suddenly hears it spoken perfectly. "Come in," Earl said. "I just made coffee." They sat at Earl's kitchen table for 2 hours and 40 minutes. The table had a yellow plastic top and 4 chairs, one of which had a cushion tied to it with a piece of twine. A rooster clock on the wall ticked above the stove. The coffee was strong and came in a mug that said, "World's Okayest Fisherman," that Constance had given him as a joke 4 Christmases ago. Shaq told Earl what happened after that summer. The move to Texas, Robert G. Cole High School, the scholarship to LSU, the 1992 NBA draft, #1 overall, the Orlando Magic, the Los Angeles Lakers, the championships, the free throws, and how the tucked elbow had never left him, not once in 34 years. Earl listened. He did not react the way people sometimes reacted to Shaq's story, with wide eyes and loud amazement. He listened the way he had sat in that folding chair in the summer of 1989, quietly, taking it in. When Shaq finished, Earl was quiet for a moment. He looked at his coffee mug. "I didn't know if any of it stuck," Earl said. "I drove home after that last morning and I thought, maybe that boy didn't need any of it. Maybe I was just an old man talking." "It all stuck," Shaq said. "Every word," Earl nodded slowly. He pressed his lips together. He looked at the window. "Margaret would have liked to hear that," he said. "She always said I should have left a name." Shaq reached into the pocket of his jacket. He pulled out an envelope. He set it on the yellow table. "I'm not good at saying what things are worth," Shaq said, "but I know what those 11 mornings were worth to me. And I know it's 34 years late." Earl looked at the envelope. He did not open it. "You didn't have to come all this way," he said. "Yes, I did," Shaq said. Earl picked up his coffee mug. He held it with both hands the way old people do when they want something to hold on to. "My wife used to say," Earl began, then stopped. He tried again. "She used to say that the things you do for people without expecting anything back are the only things that are really yours. Everything else is just a transaction." Shaq looked at him. "She was right. She was always right," Earl said. And he smiled. A slow, full smile that reached all the way up. Constance Pickett Ramirez, 54 years old, found out about the visit when she came on Sunday. Her father told her over dinner. He showed her the envelope, which he had still not opened. He said he was saving it. Constance opened it for him after dinner. Inside was a letter and a check. The letter was 2 paragraphs. It said that an education fund had been established in Margaret Pickett's name at the church in Abbeville, where Earl had coached youth basketball for 30 years. The fund would provide equipment and training support for youth players in Henry County for as long as it was needed. The check covered 10 years of funding. Constance put the letter down on the table. She looked at her father. Earl was looking at the window, at the darkness outside where the road ran past the house. He had sat on that porch for 34 years looking at that road. He would not need to anymore. The Margaret Pickett Youth Basketball Fund held its first equipment distribution day in Abbeville on a Saturday morning in June 2023. 14 children received new shoes, new balls, and new jerseys. Earl sat in a folding chair on the sideline of the outdoor court behind the church and watched them play. He brought his thermos. Because somewhere out there right now, there is someone who did a small thing for a young person and never found out if it mattered. A teacher who stayed late, a neighbor who said the right thing, a stranger who showed up 11 mornings and then disappeared. It mattered. It always mattered. And sometimes, 34 years later, someone knocks on your door to tell you so. Before you go, drop a comment right now and tell us where you are watching from. Abbeville, Atlanta, London, Lagos, wherever you are, we want to know. We read every single one. If this moved you even a little, hit that like button right now. 1 second. That is all it takes to help this story reach someone who needs to hear it today. Share this with one person. A teacher, a coach, someone who poured into a young person and never heard back. Because they deserve to know it stuck. And if you are new here, welcome. Subscribe and tap that bell. Stories like this every single week. Now click on the video on your screen. The next one will move you just as much. We will see you there.